All right, cool. Let's get this thing started. Does anyone have questions for Nick? Yeah, Bijan.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for doing this. So I recently read on StreamEntry your stages or advice for stage 4 practice, and I found that extremely helpful, just the amount of detail you go into and the very practical advice like micro intentions and this emphasis that you can't control the awareness, introspective awareness. It's not something you can direct like attention is. It's just something you can coax or yeah, with these micro intentions. I have a question about actually feelings of tension during meditation. Whether I have a confusion whether they are they just like I am tense because I haven't exercised and the muscle it's a completely muscular thing, or does tension often also correspond to an emotional aspect? And if there's a way to tell the difference.
Well, I guess with tension, I guess the first thing I want to figure out is whether I'm tense because what I'm doing is challenging for me or new, right? So like anytime you're learning a new skill, you're going to have all sorts of tension that isn't necessary for performing that skill just because it's new, it's challenging, right? You're not used to it. So if it's that kind of tension, I would expect that to go down naturally over time. So then if it doesn't, then I would look at some other things. Is this the kind of tension that arises just randomly during your meditation practice, or is it like a constant thing?
It is a random thing. So it feels like small like balls either in the back or in the chest.
Okay.
And it doesn't seem like it's associated with anything emotional. Like it doesn't feel like there's anything emotional attached to it, right. At least at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, could be postural stuff. Could be, I don't want to get too woo-woo, but it could be some weird energetic stuff as well. I've had like odd things in the past where when I got to certain stages in practice, my body would twist up and contort into all these weird things, and that took a while to work its way through. Basically, whenever there's stuff like that going on, what I always do is I just kind of play dumb and just relax and pretend that it's nothing of any importance. And then I wait and see what happens. And if it's something that is of importance or means something, it usually kind of makes itself known at some point that that's what's going on. And that way I don't sort of indulge in it prematurely, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that is a good question. It answered it. I was always wondering, like, should I focus on it, like make it a meditation object, or
yeah,
I think like playing dumb is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't focus on it unless it basically I don't have any other option, and then I'm totally happy to take it as my object. Yeah, that's assuming you're doing some sort of like concentration-based practice.
In this case, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Bijan. Thank you, Nick. I have, again, generally speaking, raise your hand if you want to ask a question. But as I said, if for whatever reason you're uncomfortable with that, Sean, I see you. I'll hit you next. I do have a question here, a private one, and I'll just read it out loud. Is it okay to ask about an experience, an equanimous experience, on and off the cushion, lasted 2 to 3 weeks? I just finished 4 years teacher training with Chuladasa. So that's what I have there. Equanimous experience lasted 2 to 3 weeks. That's all I got for you, Nick.
Sounds really cool. Let's hear it.
It does sound good, right? If you want to, whoever you are, if you want to out yourself and unmute your mic, please feel free to just go ahead.
Oh, can't hear you, Mary.
Mary, I can't hear you, unfortunately. Okay, if you're gonna go get your headphones, go ahead. We'll come back to you. I hope that's all right. So in the meantime, thanks, Mary. In the meantime, Sean, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, we actually had a discussion in this group a while back about like general like shamatha practice and kind of like, it seems like there's like one way you can do shamatha where you're just like watching, say, the breath and you're just kind of watching whatever comes up. But you can also kind of like almost create a like almost object out of the breath that's more like fixed. It seems like that's like another way of doing it. I mean, are those both like ways you can do shamatha practice? Or is there like one you'd recommend over another?
That's a good question. I mean, there are tons of ways to do shamatha practice. Can you describe just a little bit more what you mean by this, the second one?
Yeah, I mean, I think like when I was practicing stuff from TMI, like I may not have been doing it as it was described in the book exactly, but I kind of got to the point where I was like, I can kind of make the breath seem like smoother or more like a thing that's like always in my attention instead of like, kind of vibrating or going away or stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. So you're right. If you sort of do vanilla TMI, you wouldn't do that. You would just stay with physical sensations of the breath, which is totally fine. That works just fine. However, I actually found after I studied a bit with Shyla Catherine, I took one of her online retreat things, and it was awesome. I can highly recommend that. She talks a lot about having as your object she calls it the concept of the breath, but essentially the mental representation of the breath rather than physical sensation. And I find that works super well for getting into much deeper states of concentration. Because what happens is if you just stay with physical sensations, what I found is that it gets to a point where it's really, really difficult to determine whether the way that you're experiencing the breath sensations is because of sort of the fleeting, ever-changing nature of those sensations, or whether it's because your attention is making these extremely rapid micro movements. At a certain point, it's extremely difficult to tell the difference between those two. And when you're developing concentration, basically all you really need to develop strong concentration is to be able to tell in any given moment whether your attention's on your object or it's not on your object, right? That's the main thing. You need that feedback. If you don't have that feedback, then you're kind of blind, right? So what's really nice about mental objects is exactly as you described. They're nice and smooth and continuous, and so it's super obvious the moment the attention leaves that object, because there's suddenly this discontinuity that normally isn't there. And so it's a great way to train to deepen concentration. So I find that for a lot of people, they reach a certain point using the physical object where the breath becomes very, very subtle. Everything is really calm. And at that stage, usually the mental version, if you will, of the breath becomes much more obvious. And there's almost this sort of natural inclination then to take that as the object. And I encourage that in my students because it works really, really well.
Great, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great.
Great.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Nick. Mary, you want to take another shot? Unfortunately, no, we still can't hear you. Oof. I'm sorry. If you want to write a little more to me, we'll. I'm not sure. You can go into your settings and look and see what microphone you're using and mess around with that. It's hard to sort of do IT remotely, especially if you're not an IT person. but you could also just send me a little bit more info in the chat, and I'm happy to be your mouthpiece. So, all right, great. Did anyone else want to put up a hand and ask a question? Matthew, I saw you first, and then Avinash.
Avinash, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, Avinash.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Hey, Nick. I also read the post on Reddit that Bijan mentioned earlier, the one about micro-intentions. I found that very helpful, but I only recently read it, so I've only recently started to incorporate it in my sets, and so I was just wondering whether there are any common pitfalls that one might encounter while doing this. That's all. It's too. I feel like it's too new to me for me to have any specific question about it. But I find it helpful, and I wanted to know if there are any common pitfalls one might encounter.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, sure. Probably the most common pitfall with something like that is it's done with too much force. So it's really tough. Like describing these things in language versus doing them are like really, really different things. And often, I do my best, but I can't often like hit it exactly. So the key with the micro intentions is that they are super light, quick, gentle things. I use the analogy of like, touching a snowflake with a feather or something. But that often gets missed when then I go and describe, you can do like 1 every breath or, 3 every inhale or whatever. And then people kind of forget about the quick, light, and gentle part, and they get sort of sucked into this like really intense hammering away at their object kind of thing, and it creates a ton of mental tension and physical tension, and that's that's not what I meant at all. But that seems to be the biggest pitfall. The other thing, and this is something that tends to go away with some practice with doing it like that, is because it's a fairly intense way to practice, it can be kind of tiring when you first get into it. So if that's happening, I mean, that's kind of normal. I wouldn't worry about it. Do it for a bit, and then kind of do it the normal way for a while, and then go back to it. The thing about it that can make it sort of tiring is that when a lot of the times we don't realize just how little we need to do to have an intention. Like, it doesn't require any kind of verbalizations, like internal or external. It doesn't require any visualizing. That's all extra stuff. That's completely unnecessary. The intention is just the intention. It's like, I want to raise my arm. Okay. I didn't like tell myself, Nick, raise your arm. And I didn't like say, okay, contract this muscle. And then, we don't need to do that. It's the same, like there's no difference in the meditation practice. But oftentimes, because it seems like a new thing, we forget about that and we do all kinds of unnecessary stuff, and that makes it more tiring than it needs to be as well. So.
Nick, can I jump in really quickly and just ask if you wouldn't mind very briefly explaining what this micro intentions concept is for folks who might not be familiar?
Sure. Yeah, it's just a simply I guess the first thing I would say is I'm a big proponent of being really, really clear on precisely what the purpose of that specific meditation session is before you start it. What's your goal for that session? And if you don't like using the words goal and meditation together, you can say your aspiration or intention for the session, whatever. Just so you're really clear on what exactly you're doing. And then the micro intentions are just simply a reflection of that. So let's say it's, I'm going to do my best to notice the very beginning of the inhale, somewhere in the middle of the inhale, the end of the inhale, the beginning of the exhale, somewhere in the middle of the exhale, and and then the transition back to the inhale. So let's say that's my task, right? That's what I'm going to practice in my session. Then the micro intentions are just very gentle, light reminders, essentially, that that's what I'm doing. And I might do them once every few breaths. I might do it with every breath. I might do it multiple times in the breath cycle. So, you know, I'll be inhaling and then, yeah, notice the end. Oh, there's the end. And of course, I'm not actually verbalizing when I do this, but, you know, as a descriptive tool. Or notice the beginning of the exhale. Oh, there's the exhale, and so on. So that's all it is. It sounds kind of clunky, but I think a lot of us just do that anyway, but maybe didn't think about it quite in this way before. So, and I guess one of the reasons that it can be helpful to do it like this, doesn't mean you have to do this, but if you tend to have meditation sessions where you just sort of, you don't really get distracted because your awareness is pretty good, but you just sort of hang out and nothing seems to happen. Right? Concentration doesn't seem to deepen or anything, and you're just sort of staying in the same place all the time. And so this kind of thing really ups the intensity, really ups the engagement with the object and with the process of the practice. And that seems to really help kind of get things moving again. So.
Avinash, did that take care of your question?
Yeah. Thank you, Nick.
You're welcome.
All right, great. And thanks, Nick, for that explanation as well. Appreciate that. Matthew, did you still have a question?
Yeah, if you feel comfortable answering, I'm curious what your practice is like these days. Do you have something in particular you do, or?
Yeah, sure. So these days, I guess probably since about the start of September-ish, it's mostly just straight up breath at the nose, shamatha type of practice. Occasionally I'll throw in some jhanas. But essentially, what I'm interested in is seeing how much I can let go. So I'm sort of become really fascinated with this idea of surrender and letting go, especially letting go of any pretense of control, because it seems to push all the right buttons, so to speak. So that's kind of mostly what I'm exploring these days.
Thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions? Who's next? Step right up. Yes, Monica.
Hey John.
Hello again, by the way. Nice to see you.
Great to see everybody. My question is related to the last two questions, and it's a practice question. I've been doing open awareness and trying to let go a lot recently, and that's been really fun to hang out in a sense of spaciousness and just kind of see what everything is going on in the present moment, really connecting with the sense of presence. But so I've done a lot of noting before, and I've done TMI, so I understand the importance of shamatha, and it feels like this letting go process you've been talking about and that I've been practicing, it doesn't really necessarily lend itself to concentration. I haven't tried doing micro intentions with it, but I'm just wondering how does that practice intersect with like jhana or concentration? And if I'm in kind of this like equanimous, presence abiding, letting go practice, is even having the intention to concentrate beneficial?
So that's a really interesting question. I find personally that jhana practice is all about letting go. It's all about surrender, really, because it's kind of hard to get into the jhana if you're thinking that you're gonna be in it, first of all, and that you've got any control over the thing, right? So in a way, it's I actually find the sort of right at the edge of entry into jhana is an amazing place for practicing and developing equanimity and letting go, because it won't abide by any bullshit, like any of the usual, like gaming the thing or pretending like you're equanimous but you really do care, or all that kind of, all the games that we play. The jhana just, it won't have any of it. It's amazing. So so in my mind, that's how those two things are connected. Interestingly, though, on a really practical level, that's not something I would have been able to do prior to having sort of a really stable and effortless exclusive attention. Because like if you let go, like you're letting go, the thing has to kind of do itself, right? It can't have you meddling with it all the time. So while a certain amount of letting go kind of helps to relax, really abide in the space and so on, I find that doesn't really work to deepen concentration until you've already got like a certain amount of it, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Thank you for that.
Sure.
I have a follow-up question, but I'll pass the mic.
All right, well, thanks, Monica, and thanks, Nick. And maybe if we have more time and there aren't a ton more questions, we can end up circling back to you. But I do want to see if anyone else has questions they'd like to ask. Ian, and then Rochelle.
Could you just give a few more examples of like what goals might be as you start a meditation session?
Sure. So depends where you're at in your practice and what kind of practice you're doing. But let's say you're doing TMI.
Yeah.
So it's kind of handy because in TMI, they essentially tell you what the goals for each stage are. But those are fairly broad, right? And I like to be super specific. So let's say my problem or my biggest challenge, say in an average sit, would be to, I don't know, to somehow maintain sufficient mindfulness or awareness, but still have enough sort of engagement with my object that I don't get distracted. Okay, so I want to have the good vividness and detail and clarity in my object, but I don't want to do that at the expense of losing my awareness. So that would be like a classic TMI kind of trade-off thing. So goals for that would be that at the very beginning of the session, I'm going to first establish that awareness and ground myself in that awareness before I do anything else. Then my next task is going to be to very sort of gently, in a sort of almost circumspect way, introduce the object and allow it to sort of crystallize itself, and then take that with the attention, and then to continuously monitor what's going on so that I know if I'm starting to lose that awareness, in which case I'll do X, or to monitor whether I'm sort of going a little too far and sort of just hanging out and being spacious in awareness and not engaging enough with the object, in which case I'll do Y. That would be an example. So I just set that up at the beginning, like before I start, like I know, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. That, and then it's really straightforward, because then when I'm practicing, I don't get confused or anything. It's like, oh, I'm starting to lose my object. Okay, I need to engage more fully. Oh, I overdid it. Now my awareness is collapsing. Okay, so now I'm back up. Then it's pretty straightforward. It's like, you're practicing a piece of music. It's like, well, bars 3 and 6, those are the tricky ones. The rest is pretty good. And then I'm going to try hands together, and then that's what you do. So, does that help?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, thanks. Rochelle.
Oh, thanks. Hey, so I'm practicing open awareness as well, and I'm experiencing a lot of persistent physical discomfort and agitation in most of my sits as of recent, and a lot of reactivity that I get identified with, like agitation and aversion. And I'm pretty sure it's 3 characteristics, because I've been in this kind of territory before, but it's been a while since I've had to deal with it. But I'm wondering if there's any specific things that you could recommend to work with this, particularly discomfort and resistance.
Right. Equanimity. I know that's the pat answer, right? But so, well, if you want to look at it at a really sort of technical, mechanical level, moving from 3 characteristics to arising and passing requires that basically the temporal resolution increases, right? So things need to move faster, and you kind of need to get into it more, so to speak. Now, there's lots of different ways of doing that, but the way I like the best, that I find works the best for me, is to relax, actually, not like to go in guns blazing, but actually to like kick back a little bit, relax, bring more equanimity into it, bring more curiosity into it, bring more interest into it. I find that when there's enough equanimity, what happens is that the sensations kind of assume their natural speed. When there isn't enough equanimity, then everything's kind of sticky, and you hold on to things, and it doesn't allow the process just to happen sort of naturally, and so everything gets gummed up. So the degree that you can kind of chill, relax, open up, be really curious and interested and fascinated with what's going on, that usually does the trick. And then things kind of speed up, and then you're off.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh, welcome.
Thanks, and just we're going to go to Mary in one moment and just try again and see if we can hear this now extremely intriguing question after all this buildup. No pressure. But I just to clarify for anyone who isn't necessarily familiar, I just want to make sure you and Rochelle, you were talking about progression through the so-called insight knowledges or jhanas in the classical progress of insight. Just for anyone who, because you talked about moving from 3 characteristics to arising and passing. So just for anyone who's curious, those are the names of stages on the 16-stage progress of insight, the sort of map that is classically used in the Vipassana tradition of Mahasi Sayadaw. So I just wanted to give a little context in case anyone didn't know what that was. So they were talking about how to move from one stage to the next stage. Do I have that right, Nick?
Yeah. Although I
okay.
I suspect it's not just Mahasi, because it's in the Visuddhimagga and before that one. But he seemed to really dig it. So.
Yep, it's in the Visuddhimagga, you're right. And S.N. Goenka talked about it in his own way. Right. So absolutely right. Yeah, that's a good point. But one of the classical Vipassana maps that our Burmese antecedents seem to have really become taken with.
Yeah.
All right. Mary, do you want to unmute and take a swing?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yay. Listen, everybody, I'm looking forward to hearing the recording. I wanted to be on the whole meeting. I know, Nick, this is a question that I want to ask very succinctly. I had an experience this summer where I was studying, I'm a meditation nerd and a science nerd, okay, so bear with me. I was studying systems theory in a Kalyana Mita group, and all of a sudden, the same day or the next day, I became equanimous. Nothing bothered me, no emotional triggers, just out of the blue. And it was so important to me, I didn't even want to go camping, and I go camping every summer. And the only thing I needed to do to refresh it every day was to remind myself in the morning that there was no self. There was just a set of mental processes. And it went on for 2.5 weeks, I'm not sure. And as far as cessation of thinking during that time, the only thoughts I had were what was in front of me, meaning not, not remembering or planning or having any kinds of other thoughts. So I just wondered, Nick, have you ever heard of this? And do you have any comment? It did go away. I got very busy one day packing to come home from camping, like a 12-hour day, and it went away, and I'm not worried about it. I still practice, right? It's just a thing that happened. I'm not craving it. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not doing anything, but I just, what do you think, Nick?
Well, I think it's awesome, first of all, whenever those kinds of things happen. In terms of what it means, well, I mean, I guess on one level, what it means is you can probably get there again. So I'm a big believer of you get there once and then you try to figure out how that happens so you can get there again and again and again. And if there's any advice I would give around this, it would be that experience that you had certain qualities about it that really impressed themselves on your subconscious, right? As well as really colored your conscious experience a certain way. Some of those qualities are going to be available to you whenever you remember in whatever particular moment you happen to be in, whether you're meditating or just going about your day. Simply because if you think about it, every single moment, without exception, all the insights are there, just like staring you in the face, essentially. And so all that's really required, all that's really required is just to tune into that, right? And what's awesome when you have these sort of protracted experiences like that is you get a really good taste. So I bet that you can even now just kind of bring some of that at least back to mind, kind of like, you're savoring a dish that you ate that was really wonderful. You won't necessarily recreate the whole thing, but you can still in your mind savor some of the qualities of that dish. It's similar here, and by kind of touching it repeatedly whenever you remember, you're essentially, I don't know if this is scientifically accurate or not, but to me it seems like you're basically setting up a search pattern for your unconscious, and it's going to find that stuff in all sorts of moments throughout the day. Maybe it won't last 3 weeks, maybe it only lasts 3 seconds, but these sorts of things add up over time. So that's what I would kind of suggest.
Okay, thanks. That's what I'm doing. I've just sort of decluttered and simplified my life to the point that I can just focus on what's in front of me. So appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to my question, and I will look forward to hearing the recording. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks for asking, Mary.
Thanks, Mary. I'm glad we were able to get it done in the end. Thanks for your work on your end, and I guess your husband's work in helping you set it up based on your message. Are there other, I see there's a message here from Tom. Can you recommend a written guide? And then is it Jolt? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Did I get it? Oh, awesome. But first, just tell me I got it. But first, from Tom, can you recommend a written guide for incorporating open awareness into practice and what a reason for doing it would be? Nick?
A written guide. I guess I'd need to know a little bit more. Like, I need to know what you mean specifically, Tom, by open awareness, because these words are, like, it's not always clear what that might refer to. I have my idea, but it might not be the same as yours. So, do you have?
I don't know. I don't know. I've heard people. Not only in this meeting but other meetings talk about using open awareness.
Right.
So I decided rather than closing my ears to it, let me find out what open awareness, what the purpose for using open awareness
Right.
would be. And you know, like I'm looking for a resource, maybe simpler than, but similar to TMI.
Okay.
Like I like the step by step, do this, then this, then this.
Does anybody here in this group have a resource like that? Because I don't have anything that comes to mind.
I'd say pop it in the chat if you do. That would probably be the easiest way. And then, yeah, otherwise I think we might get some crosstalk. But if you have,
okay,
and if there are only a few, I'll go ahead and read them out after for the benefit of the recording.
As to what the purpose or something like that, well, there's lots of good reasons to do that kind of practice. So it's an awesome practice to do in daily life, because one of the things we often run into in daily life is our experience gets contracted, or another way to put it is the available information gets really heavily filtered. And so the experience is often, you know, something like this, you know, centered around my head. My thoughts are the biggest thing, and like I don't have a body. There's no external world. Like it's just all this coming from me. And to a large degree, that's just because there's too much of that, too much filtering going on. So what's nice about open awareness is it just opens that whole thing up. And so then you can just kind of rest in sort of the experience of all of this as a process. And so thinking is just part of that process, and you know, emotions and body sensation, they're all just kind of there going through, and it's it really sort of lends itself to a more equanimous perspective on things. It's also really useful during meditation. Whenever, I don't know, it's kind of what I like to do when I'm doing Vipassana, basically just hang out in this big space and watch the show, so to speak. Seeing the things arise and pass, seeing this, determining that, determining that, determining that, and all those kinds of things tend to be readily apparent in that kind of larger open space. So that would be another time to do it. And I'm sure there's lots more.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I'll just mention that multiple people in the chat named Loch Kelly, that's L-O-C-H, Kelly, and someone specifically said that there is a page with tons of interviews and practice guides specifically on open awareness technique, and the hosts are students of Loch's, and that website for the folks listening or watching, whatever the case may be, is awarenessexplorers.com/podcast. awarenessexplorers.com/podcast. I haven't been to that, but this is coming from someone in the chat, so I just wanted to throw that out there.
Cool. Thanks for that.
All right. Yeah, sure. Other questions? Oh, right, Joel, I'm so sorry. Yes, you're up.
Yeah, no worries. Hi, Nick. My question is a follow-up to your comments about letting go practice. So this is something that's become relevant for me recently, and I'm curious to hear your take on it, because I know you'll have something precise to say. So in particular, I'm interested in the phenomenology of letting go. So what exactly do you mean? Like, what are the sensations involved in letting go? What are you letting go of? And presumably, like the way you were speaking about it, you've been doing this for a little while, so you've seen some development in this, I'm taking. How would you measure the development? Like, if you're better at letting go now, what does that mean?
Right.
Do you let go of more things? Is it more effective to do so? How do you know that you let something go? Yeah, if you can speak around any of those questions.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll take it backwards. So to me, letting go is basically the opposite of resisting or being contracted. And an interesting thing I found is that whenever there's some kind of a contraction in the mind, there's also an associated contraction somewhere in the body. Might be really subtle. I might not notice it necessarily in the moment, but every time I check, it's there. And so one thing that I've noticed personally is that over time, I'm just less contracted and actually less physically tense, which is really interesting. Not in sort of in like a gross way, but like when approaching things that would previously have been aversive, the experience is much more open and there isn't like that tightening inside, okay, that there would have been before. So that's one way that I know it's working. Okay, that would be sort of in a daily life context. On the meditation cushion, so I tend to use fear as my guide and litmus test. So, and my compass. So when something is scary, past experience has shown me that that's the direction I need to go. And the scarier it is, usually, the more on the money I am. And so that's why I'm actually doing this practice, because I find that's the, not to be too dramatic, but that's the scariest thing that I can do on the cushion, essentially. But what's really interesting about it is that when I can kind of successfully do that, then the fear dissipates, things deepen. I'm in, usually newer territory, and then the thing repeats. Then I'll find something to get contracted about, and then I'll figure a way of letting that go. And as I start to do that, fear arises, and then I know, okay, good, I'm doing the right thing, and then it just keeps going, right? So but that's a very sort of idiosyncratic thing. Obviously, that's not going to be the case for everybody. So some experimentation will be necessary. But I think sort of a general thing I could say about it in meditation is very similar to daily life in that there are subtle sort of contractions of the mind around something. Like if you're doing, say, this is really obvious to me in a shamatha practice, where concentration is deepening, the object is just this beautiful, smooth, continuous, lovely thing, and there's some blemishes that I notice, right? And I want to purify that object more. I want to remove those blemishes. And there's this sort of habitual, let me go in there and fix it thing, which wrecks everything, right? At that stage. And so it's recognizing that as this like a little impulse, right? Like a little contraction to do that. Oh, that object isn't quite as good as it could be. And then just relaxing and just, usually all it takes actually is just recognizing that that's what I'm doing, and then it's dropped and it's gone. But if that's not the case, then just recognizing this process and just relaxing, basically. I mean, I don't think it's any more fancy than that. I finally answered about 30% of your question, though.
That's okay. You talked around it, which is the thing I wanted. That's great. Thanks.
Is that helpful? Does that kind of get it? What you? Yeah.
Yeah, you hit it. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Oh, one other thing. Okay, so it's relaxing, but it's more than just relaxing. So it's also, there's two other things. There's, if you're anything like me, which I think you are, there is this tendency to over-optimize. So like constantly like, oh, it's great now, but I can see how it could be even better. And then you do the next thing, and then, oh, but now I can see how I could improve that even more. And then you do the next thing. And what I find is you do that too much, and it's kind of like you're on this, 50-foot tall rickety ladder, and there's just no stability to it, right? Like it's just, the thing's gonna fall apart at any moment. So part of this process of letting go is, yes, you know, we do want to refine the object, we do want to improve it just that little bit more, but there's also a real need, I find, for just abiding in the place where you're at and really appreciating it, and just like, gosh, this is really so nice, you know, and not as a, okay, I'm just gonna do that, now I'm gonna get going. It's just like, oh, like just basking in that for a while. It tones everything down, everything just naturally releases, relaxing is a lot easier. And then it's a much more natural process, I find, to take it that one more little step, and then abide in that for a while, and then take that one more little step. So it might not be like exactly what you're getting at, but those two things are really closely related, I find.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Joel. Other questions? We might have time for one or two more. I think we're going to wrap up at around 1/4 of, which is an hour after we started doing the Q&A. Nick, is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's good.
Great. We got any questions? Michael?
Hey, Nick.
Oh, did I? Okay, go ahead.
Question about a noting question.
Sure.
Sometimes when moving between the sensations of the rising and falling that's being noted, attention flickers between the sensations of rising and falling and the concept of rising and falling. Mm-hmm. And then so the object should be the sensations, but there's a very fine difference. Is that an appropriate place for where you would place a micro intention?
So what do you mean, but the object should be the sensation? Can you tell me a little bit more what you mean by that? Just so I'm on the same page.
The sensations of the breath.
Yeah.
The expanding of the abdomen,
yeah.
Stretching, doing the fabric on clothing, or whatever it may be. So that would something I would note in the rising, and then there's the rise. Then there's the idea of rising, and attention can flicker between those or get set on one or the other. So is that where an appropriate space would be to place a micro intention?
Okay. It could. The way I practice noting, though, is basically everything is fair game. So I might have, say, like a home base. So like the breath of the abdomen, for example, that's my home base, say. And so if there isn't anything else that is particularly drawing my attention, that's where I'll hang out and I'll do my noting there. But if something else arises that captures my attention, I don't bring it back. I have to know that thing as clearly and precisely as possible in that moment. And so if you are able to recognize there's a sensation, and now, oh, here's the mental counterpart of that. Here's like some mentally generated visuals that represent that sensation, or mentally generated sound that goes with that sensation, or whatever it is. That needs to be noted as well, with the same sort of precision and involvement that you're noting the sensation of the abdomen. So it's not the kind of thing where I would want to just go back. Now I know there's lots of different ways to do noting. This is just how I do it. I find that really helpful. Because ultimately, I mean, if you read Mahasi, ultimately the idea is nothing, I mean, the aspiration is nothing escapes your noting. Absolutely nothing. Doesn't matter what it is. And so this is like a way to facilitate that.
But which should be the primary object?
So again, when I note, I don't have a primary object. I just have a home base. So I have like a base of operations. So, you know, if I get distracted at some point, I go back to home base. If there doesn't seem to be anything else going on, I go back to home base. If I'm sitting there and I can't find any sensations, I go back to home base, you know. So I always have that to go back to. But whatever attention notices, that's my object in that moment, right? That's how I like to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Michael. Stephen had a question.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn off my camera just so it doesn't interfere with my bandwidth. So my question was regarding how, or like what tips, your like best set of tips or tools for taking the technical aspects of practice off the mat and into the world. So like translating the different types of practices that we've been discussing tonight into like, you know, ethical conduct, virtuous living, compassionate action in the world. I know it's kind of a big question for the last one, and it could go, there's probably a lot there, but if you have just like, you know, your best tips.
Sure. So in many ways, that's the whole point, right? That's the most important part. Otherwise, you know, just sitting is nice, but it's kind of pointless in my view, unless you do that next step. However, you're very right. It needs practice. The sort of automatic transfer from the cushion to daily life, there is some of that, but it's minuscule compared to sort of what we need. So it really requires training to do that transfer. The way I like to do it is basically start sort of at the basis of everything, which is just good old-fashioned basic mindfulness during the day. You really need that foundation before you kind of can do anything more fancy. So that's sort of the bedrock. So to do that, you need a few things. Number one, you actually have to have a really clear sense for yourself what mindfulness actually is, what it feels like, how a moment with mindfulness is different from a moment without it, so that you can clearly know whether you've got it in that moment or not, right? That's kind of essential. So you get clear on that. The other thing you need is basically the ability to, if we're talking about mindfulness, the ability to bring mindfulness up on demand quickly. So within a second or two. So that's a trainable skill, right? And we train that on the cushion all the time. So that one, you know, if you've been meditating a while, that one should be pretty straightforward. The reason that it needs to be on demand and quick like that is because the next part of the puzzle is reminding yourself to do it. And in fact, that's kind of the trickiest part during the day, remembering to do that. If it takes you a while, you know, like a minute or something to get into it, that's too long. It's not going to last. It's not going to survive daily life, right? So you want something, you want it to be so that you can quickly manifest that state of mind, right? And then you need a way of remembering. And there's lots of ways to do this. Like, you know, people have phones with reminders, Fitbits, watches, all kinds of things. Actually, I have this. It's a little device with a haptic motor that I built with my son because he likes doing electronics, and it's programmable. And it goes off every 2 minutes. It gives me a little buzz for 1 second, and that's my reminder. I actually recommend fairly high frequency. So like every couple minutes or every 5 minutes or even every 1 minute. It requires a bit of experimentation. I find that just things like every hour or, you know, a few times a day just never did it for me. Maybe my life was too chaotic, I don't know, but that just wasn't enough. But I find when it's frequent enough, and if I take it seriously, so the problem with frequency is you'll habituate. So you actually need to really take it seriously. So when you experience it, you have to do your thing, right? You have to establish or refresh your mindfulness. There's no, oh yeah, I heard that, I'll get to it later kind of stuff. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. And then what you'll find is that that there are these little pools of mindfulness that start to form during the day, and then they start to coalesce. And they tend to form during the parts of the day where the conditions are really easy, right? So you're alone, you don't have any high cognitive demands, you don't have to interact with anybody else. So those are the easiest times. And that's where you'll first notice that basis really establishing itself well. For ages, before I had this, I cued myself every time I got into a car. And it's awesome. Every time I get into a car now, it's like, I'm in the zone. It's amazing. So you train, right, to do these things. Then you add on sort of extra work, sort of more intentional practice around more difficult things, right? So now we'll go into things like, oh, I got to do my emails. Can I do my emails really mindfully? So, you set it up just like you would anything else, and you say, okay, I'm going to do this next email, and I'm going to try to maintain mindfulness the whole time. And then after you did the email, you evaluate. How did I do? Okay, pretty good, not so good, whatever. Okay, here's another email. Let me try again. And you actually practice. And then you kind of build up. The hardest is interactions with other people. I find that the most challenging to maintain that. But it's totally doable. It's just, little bit by little bit, you build it up. Once you have that, then add whatever goodies you want on top. Precepts, Brahma-viharas, open awareness, whatever you want. But you kind of need this basic, reasonably stable, steady mindfulness before you can do that kind of stuff, I find. Does that help?
Yeah, that was a very rich answer. A lot of interesting things I never thought of before. That's really cool. That little haptic motor thing is that's the first I've heard of something like that besides, the mindfulness bell every couple minutes. That's a really cool system that you have set up there. Yeah, connecting the pools of mindfulness, that really clicked because I can clearly see those, and yeah, connecting the dots between those is the next step. So yeah, thank you.
Essentially, the aspiration, right, is whatever you can do on the cushion, you want to be able to do in daily life. That's the aspiration. Like, obviously, there's some limits there. You can't hang out in fourth jhana, necessarily when you're, interacting with people. But that should be sort of the guiding principle. And so in the meditation session, we get really, really good at these skills, and then we try to transfer it, and we come up with all these sorts of games and things to practice that actual transfer, and then we use it, right? And so there's a really important synergy that occurs between the formal meditation sessions and the daily life practice, right? So the better the daily life practice, usually the better the meditation sessions go. And the better the meditations go, they set up for a better daily life practice. And then if you can punctuate the day with, another meditation session, even if it's a few minutes here and there, that also helps this process. So there's lots of these little things you can do.
Awesome, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great question.
All right, so that was a great note to wrap things up on. So thanks, Stephen. Thank you, Nick. And more broadly, thank you, Nick, for joining us, for taking our questions, for giving us such wonderful, nuanced, rich answers. Thank you, everyone who attended. So I mentioned this in, Tom, is there something you want to say?
How can we send Donna to Nick?
Yeah, so that's what I'm getting to. That's okay. I do encourage you, if you felt that you received any sort of value from this, to offer Donna. Nick has said that this isn't really a big deal. It's not something that he's asking for. It is something that I am suggesting. I think that it is very appropriate to, and in keeping with our very old tradition, to offer Dana, to offer donations given out of gratitude, feelings of generosity and gratitude toward the teachings and the teacher. And it's a good opportunity for you to work on your own qualities of generosity and open-heartedness. So consider it a way of doing yourself a favor. And the way that you can do that is by sending, if you want to, you can PayPal Nick, and if you all have an email. If you're here, that means you got an email that has Nick's PayPal email address on it. This recording might be shared, so I don't know if Nick wants me to say his email out loud. You don't really care?
That's all right.
You mean don't do it?
Nah, that's fine. Just, we can leave it at that. That's good enough.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I hear you. So you all have an email with that email address in it that you received from me. Please, if you want to, if you feel moved to offer, you can use PayPal and send the donation to that email address. Thank you again to all of you. Thank you to Nick. Please feel free to join us for upcoming Sit Heads Meditation Club meetups. We do them every week on Thursday evenings, same time every week. And feel free to join our Slack, where we have active discussion happening every day around meditation, and where we also sit together, announce when we're sitting so that other folks can join us on video chat and have a silent sit together. So please feel free to do any of that. We've got some great guest speakers coming up, whom I've already mentioned. And that's it. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks again. Be well. See you next time, I hope.
Thanks so much.